There are moments in life when we feel utterly alone, when the world around us seems silent, and when even the familiar faces we count on feel distant. In those moments, we often wonder, why me? Why now? Why does it feel like I'm in the middle of nowhere, disconnected, and waiting for something I can't even see? But what if I told you that isolation is not the end of the road? What if this season of separation is not punishment but preparation? What if the silence you're enduring is not abandonment but a sacred pause before something extraordinary? You see, some of the most profound transformations in life happen in the wilderness. It's in the stillness, away from the noise and distractions, where we are refined, tested, and shaped into who we're meant to be. Sometimes before God opens the door to your next chapter, he closes the ones behind you. And in that in-between, you are isolated, not to harm you, but to prepare you. Tonight, we're going to explore why God isolates you before he blesses you. Stay with me, because by the end of this, you'll see that your season of loneliness may just be the key to unlocking your destiny. Let me ask you something. Have you ever seen a potter at work? Picture it. The potter takes a lump of clay, shapeless, rough, and ordinary, and begins to mold it. He doesn't rush the process. He spins the wheel, applies pressure with his hands, and carefully works out every imperfection. Now imagine if that clay could talk. It would probably cry out, "Why are you pressing me so hard? Why are you spinning me in circles? Why are you pulling me apart?" But the potter knows something the clay doesn't. He sees the masterpiece before it's even formed. He understands that the pressure, the shaping, and even the isolation from other lumps of clay are all necessary to create something beautiful and purposeful. Now let me ask you, could it be that you are in the hands of the potter right now? Could it be that the season you're walking through, the quiet nights, the closed doors, the unanswered prayers, is God shaping you, molding you, and preparing you for something greater? You see, before every blessing, there's often a breaking. Before every breakthrough, there's a wilderness. And before every crown, there's a cross. Think about the great figures we admire. Each of them had their season of isolation. Moses spent years in the desert before leading his people to freedom. Joseph was thrown into a pit and then a prison before becoming a ruler in Egypt. Even David was anointed king, but he had to flee to the caves before he ever sat on the throne. So I ask you again, could it be that your season of isolation is not a punishment, but a preparation? What if the silence you're feeling right now is God speaking to you in ways you haven't yet recognized? What if this time alone is the sacred ground where your character is being strengthened, your faith is being deepened, and your purpose is being revealed? Don't go anywhere, because in the next few minutes, we're going to uncover the 8 powerful reasons why God often isolates you before he blesses you. When life is filled with noise, constant demands, endless notifications, the opinions of others, it's easy to lose sight of what truly matters. We become so caught up in the whirlwind of activity that we neglect the deeper, quieter parts of ourselves. It's in those moments that God, in his wisdom, often allows isolation to step in. It may feel uncomfortable, even painful, but isolation is a divine gift in disguise. When we're isolated, the distractions that once consumed us are stripped away. Suddenly, the things that seem so urgent lose their hold over us. The endless to-do lists, the opinions of others, and even the things we thought defined us are placed on pause. It's as if God is saying, "Stop, be still, let me speak." It's only in that stillness that we can begin to hear his voice more clearly. Think about it. How often do we drown out the whisper of God with the noise of the world? We chase after things that glitter but hold no eternal value. We allow the busyness of life to crowd out the sacred moments where we can connect with God and understand His purpose for us. Isolation, though uncomfortable, pulls us out of the chaos and into a space where we can recalibrate our priorities. We are left with the invocation to bear a burden of our sin and grief and burden. Consider a seed planted in the ground. Before it can grow into a flourishing plant, it must first be buried in darkness. In that isolation, the seed isn't surrounded by distractions, it's surrounded by purpose. The soil provides the nutrients it needs to grow, but it's a quiet, unseen process. Similarly, when we're removed from the distractions of the world, we're placed in a space where God can nourish our spirit and align us with His plan. This process is not easy. Our natural instinct is to resist it, to cling to the noise because it feels familiar, even comforting. But what we often fail to realize is that the noise isn't helping us. It's hindering us. It keeps us from focusing on the things that truly matter, our relationship with God, our purpose, and the calling He has placed on our lives. In isolation, you begin to see what's been clouded by the chaos. You realize that the approval of others isn't as important as you thought, that material success isn't the ultimate goal, and that the things of this world are temporary. It's in the silence that God reveals eternal truths, and He reminds you of who you are and whose you are. This isn't to say isolation is easy. There will be moments of doubt, moments when you question why God has placed you in this season. But as the distractions fall away, you'll find something far greater, clarity. You'll begin to see the bigger picture, to understand that this season is not about what you've lost, but about what you're gaining. God is clearing the stage of your life to make room for something far more significant than you could have ever imagined. There is something profound about being in a place where you have no choice but to trust God. Isolation has a way of stripping away every crutch we lean on, every familiar comfort, and every predictable pattern of life. It leaves us standing in a space where nothing makes sense, and yet in that emptiness, faith begins to grow. When life is full of people, plans, and predictable routines, it's easy to feel in control. We rely on our resources, our abilities, and even the reassurance of others to navigate challenges. But in isolation, those things are often removed. The job we thought was secure may be gone, the relationships we relied on may feel distant, and the plans we carefully crafted may suddenly fall apart. It's in those moments that we realize how little control we truly have and how much we need God. Isolation forces us to confront the uncomfortable truth that we are not self-sufficient. It brings us to the end of ourselves, where we have no choice but to look up. And while that may feel like a breaking point, it's actually the beginning of something beautiful, a deeper, more authentic faith. When we can no longer see a clear path forward, we learn to trust in the one who sees the whole picture. This trust doesn't come easily. At first, isolation can feel like abandonment. We cry out to God, asking why He seems silent, why the answers aren't coming, and why we feel so alone. But in those moments, God is closer than we realize. He's teaching us to walk by faith, not by sight. He's reminding us that faith isn't about having all the answers. It's about trusting Him, even when the answers aren't visible. Consider the story of Abraham. God called him to leave everything familiar and go to a land he didn't know. Abraham had no map, no clear plan, and no guarantee of what lay ahead, only a promise from God. And yet, Abraham obeyed. In his isolation from the familiar, his faith grew. He learned to trust God, not because he understood everything, but because he believed in the one who called him. Creates a similar journey for us. It's in the quiet, uncertain moments that we learn to lean on God in ways we never have before. We discover that His presence is enough, that His promises are trustworthy, and that His plan is far greater than anything we could imagine. This process isn't just about surviving the season of isolation. It's about being transformed by it. Each time we choose to trust God despite our doubts, our faith grows stronger. Each time we surrender our fears to Him, we experience His peace. And each time we take a step forward without knowing what's next, we grow in confidence, not in ourselves, but in the God who walks with us. Isolation may feel like a season of loss, but it's actually a season of gain. It's a sacred time where God strips away the superficial so He can deepen our faith and draw us closer to Him. When nothing else makes sense, we learn to trust that He does. It has a unique way of holding up a mirror to your soul. When the noise of life is stripped away, when the distractions and busy schedules are no longer there to fill the gaps, you are left alone with yourself. Your thoughts, your fears, your habits, and your heart. In that quiet space, your character is revealed, and the refining process begins. In the hustle and bustle of daily life, it's easy to ignore the cracks in your character. You might overlook your impatience because there's always something demanding your attention. You might justify small compromises in integrity because everyone else seems to be doing the same. But in isolation, there's no hiding. It's just you and God. And He begins to gently uncover the areas that need work. This can be uncomfortable. You may discover things about yourself that you didn't want to face, pride you didn't recognize, bitterness you've been holding on to, or fears that have been quietly driving your decisions. Isolation brings those weaknesses to the surface, not to condemn you, but to refine you. God doesn't expose these areas to break you. He does it to shape you into the person He created you to be. Think of gold being refined in a fire. The raw gold is placed in intense heat, which melts it down and allows the impurities to rise to the surface. The refiner then skims off the dross, leaving behind pure, valuable gold. That's exactly what happens to your character in the quiet seasons of isolation. The heat of being alone with your thoughts, stripped of external validation, reveals what doesn't belong. It's not an easy process, but it's necessary if you're going to step into the blessings and responsibilities God has for you. One of the most significant areas God works on during isolation is integrity. Integrity isn't about who you are when everyone's watching. It's about who you are when no one is looking. In isolation, there's no audience to impress, no one to validate your choices. It's just you and the decisions you make in private. These moments are where true integrity is formed. Will you choose to do what's right, even when it's difficult? Will you honor God in the small, unseen moments? God uses isolation to strengthen the foundation of your character because He knows what lies ahead. He knows the doors He's preparing to open for you and the weight of the blessings He's getting ready to pour out. But with greater blessings come greater responsibilities, and your character must be strong enough to sustain what God has planned. This refining process may feel like a setback, but it's actually a setup for something greater. The weaknesses you confront in isolation become the strengths you carry into the next season. The integrity you build in private becomes the foundation for public blessings. And the humility you learn in the quiet becomes the cornerstone of your growth. Embrace the refining work of isolation. It's not punishment, it's preparation. God is shaping you into someone who can carry His purpose with grace, humility, and strength. Isolation often feels like a pause in life, a season where everything slows down or even comes to a halt. It can feel frustrating, even discouraging, to be in a place where it seems like nothing is moving forward. But what if that stillness isn't a delay but a divine appointment? What if that quiet season is God's way of preparing you for something far greater than you can imagine? God doesn't waste time. If he has you in a season of stillness, it's not because he's forgotten you or put your life on hold. It's because he's equipping you for what's next. Greater blessings bring greater responsibility. And before he can trust you with more, he prepares you for it. The quiet seasons are not void of purpose. They are full of unseen work that will make all the difference when the blessings arrive. In isolation, God sharpens your skills, molds your character, and builds your endurance. Think of it as boot camp for the soul. Just as a soldier undergoes rigorous training before stepping onto the battlefield, you're being trained in this season for the battles and victories that lie ahead. You may not see the full picture now, but every lesson you're learning, every challenge you're facing, and every moment of waiting is shaping you into someone who can handle the weight of God's calling on your life. Look at the life of Joseph. He had dreams of greatness. But before he could step into his role as a ruler in Egypt, he had to endure years of preparation. Sold into slavery by his brothers, falsely accused and thrown into prison, Joseph could have easily believed that God had abandoned him. But in each stage of isolation, God was preparing him. As a slave, Joseph learned diligence and humility. In prison, he learned leadership and wisdom. By the time he stood before Pharaoh, he was not the same man who had once dreamed of power. He was ready for the responsibility that came with his position. God often works this way in our lives. He uses isolation to teach us patience, discipline, and trust. He refines our character and strengthens our faith so that when the doors of opportunity open, we're prepared to walk through them with confidence and integrity. Imagine if God gave you the blessing you're praying for before you were ready to handle it. The very thing meant to elevate you could overwhelm you. That's why the season of preparation is so vital. It ensures that the blessing will be a gift, not a burden. Isolation has a way of stripping away the things we've come to rely on, our relationships, our resources, and even our own strength. It forces us to confront the truth that no matter how capable, connected, or independent we think we are, there are limits to what we can handle on our own. In the quiet of isolation, when the usual supports fall away, we come face to face with the profound realization, God is our ultimate source. When life is smooth and everything is going according to plan, it's easy to lean on the comforts of the world. We trust in our jobs to provide financial security, our friends and family for emotional support, and our own abilities to achieve success. While none of these things are inherently bad, they can easily become substitutes for the one who truly sustains us. Isolation is often God's way of gently, and sometimes not so gently, removing those substitutes so we can fully depend on him. Take the Israelites in the wilderness as an example. After being freed from Egypt, they found themselves in a barren, unfamiliar place where they had no choice but to rely on God. There were no markets for food, no rivers of water, and no roads to guide them. Yet every single day, God provided manna from heaven, water from a rock, and a pillar of fire to guide their way. Through their isolation in the wilderness, God wasn't just delivering them physically, he was teaching them to trust in his provision. The same principle applies to our lives. In isolation, when our usual sources of support are unavailable, God steps in to show us that he is more than enough. We begin to understand that he is not just a part of our lives. He is the foundation of our existence. He is the source of our peace, our strength, and our hope. This dependency doesn't come naturally. At first, isolation can feel like abandonment. We cry out, wondering why God has allowed us to feel so alone. But it's in those moments of desperation that we begin to experience his presence in a deeper way. we learn that his grace truly is sufficient, that his strength is made perfect in our weakness, and that his provision never fails. Isolation also reveals the futility of depending on anything or anyone other than God. Jobs can be lost, people can disappoint, and our own plans can fall apart. But God remains constant. He doesn't change with circumstances or seasons. When everything else fades away, he is the rock we can stand on. This dependency isn't about weakness, it's about alignment. It's about shifting our focus from what's temporary to what's eternal. It's about surrendering control and trusting that the one who created us knows exactly what we need. The beauty of learning to depend on God is that it frees us from fear. When we truly believe that he is our source, we no longer worry about what we lack or what we've lost. We rest in the assurance that he will provide, sustain, and guide us, just as he always has and always will. In the constant noise of life, it's easy for God's voice to get drowned out. The world is filled with distractions, endless to-do lists, the buzz of social media, the opinions of others, and the rush to meet deadlines. Even the good things in life, like relationships, careers, and personal goals, can become sources of noise that clutter our minds and hearts. But when God draws us into isolation, it's as if he presses the mute button on everything else. In that sacred quiet, we find the clarity of vision that only comes from hearing his voice. Isolation is not a punishment, it's an invitation. It's God's way of pulling us away from the distractions that compete for our attention. In the stillness, we begin to see things for what they truly are. What once felt urgent may now seem insignificant, and what we might have overlooked before suddenly becomes clear. This clarity is a gift, allowing us to realign our lives with God's purpose and priorities. One of the greatest challenges in life is discerning God's will. When we're surrounded by noise, it's difficult to distinguish his voice from all the others clamoring for our attention. But in isolation, there's room for his voice to rise above the chaos. It's in the quiet moments, away from the crowd, that God speaks most profoundly. He whispers truth into our hearts, reveals the next steps we need to take, and reminds us of his promises. Consider the story of Elijah in the Bible. After a great victory over the prophets of Baal, Elijah found himself running for his life and retreating into the wilderness. Alone and discouraged, he sought God's guidance. It was there in the solitude of a cave that Elijah encountered God, not in a powerful wind, an earthquake, or a fire, but in a gentle whisper. That moment of isolation gave Elijah the clarity and direction he needed to continue his journey. Clarity of vision isn't just about knowing what to do next. It's about seeing God for who he truly is. In the quiet, we're reminded of his sovereignty, his goodness, and his faithfulness. We see his hand in the details of our lives and gain a deeper understanding of his character. This renewed perspective allows us to trust him more fully and follow him more confidently. Isolation also gives us the opportunity to reflect on our own hearts. In the stillness, we can examine our motives, confront our fears, and acknowledge areas where we've been holding back from God. It's a time of spiritual refinement where we're not only listening to God, but also allowing him to shape us into the people he's called us to be. When we emerge from a season of isolation, we often find that our vision is sharper, our purpose clearer, and our priorities more aligned with God's will. The distractions that once pulled us in different directions lose their power, and we're able to move forward with focus and confidence. Isolation may be difficult, but the clarity it brings is worth every moment. Isolation can feel like a heavy burden, a season marked by challenges, loneliness, and uncertainty. Yet it's in these very moments that resilience is forged. Just as muscles are strengthened by resistance, our spirits grow stronger through the trials we face in isolation. God uses this time to prepare us for the weight of the blessings He has in store. The process may be uncomfortable, but it's necessary to build the strength we'll need to sustain the blessings that come next. In isolation, challenges often feel magnified. Without the support systems we usually rely on, we are forced to confront difficulties head-on. Whether it's dealing with setbacks, facing internal struggles, or navigating uncertainty, isolation places us in situations where we must dig deeper than ever before. These moments can feel overwhelming, but they are opportunities for growth. Each challenge faced and overcome becomes a building block for resilience. You begin to realize that what once would have crushed you now only strengthens your resolve. Think of it like a storm. When a tree weathers a storm, its roots grow deeper into the ground to hold firm against the wind. Similarly, in isolation, God allows storms to come into our lives, not to destroy us, but to deepen our spiritual roots. With each passing challenge, we learn to lean on Him more fully, trusting His strength instead of our own. This dependence on God becomes the foundation of our resilience, a source of unwavering strength that carries us through both trials and triumphs. The challenges of isolation also teach us perseverance. There are times when the wait feels endless, when answers don't come as quickly as we'd like, and when we're tempted to give up. Yet it's in these moments of prolonged waiting that God teaches us the value of endurance. Perseverance isn't just about surviving, it's about thriving in the midst of difficulty. It's about continuing to trust, continuing to hope, and continuing to move forward even when the path ahead is unclear. Another critical aspect of resilience built in isolation is emotional strength. When we're alone with our thoughts and feelings, we're forced to confront the parts of ourselves we might have ignored in busier seasons. This self-awareness, though uncomfortable, is transformative. It allows us to process pain, release bitterness, and grow in emotional maturity. God uses this refining process to prepare our hearts for the blessings to come, ensuring that we're ready to handle them with grace and humility. The strength gained in isolation doesn't just prepare us for blessings, it equips us to be a blessing to others. When we've walked through difficulty and come out stronger on the other side, we're better equipped to empathize with others, offer encouragement, and point them to the source of our strength, God. Though the challenges of isolation are real and often difficult, they are not without purpose. They shape us, refine us, and strengthen us, preparing us to carry the blessings God has planned. When those blessings arrive, we'll look back and realize that the resilience we gained in isolation was one of the greatest gifts of all. When God allows a season of isolation, it's not random or purposeless, it's intentional. Every moment, every challenge, and every lesson in that season is part of His perfect plan to prepare you for what lies ahead. While it may feel like a delay, it's important to remember that God's timing is flawless. The isolation you're experiencing is not about holding you back, but about ensuring you're fully ready to embrace and steward the blessing He's preparing to give you. One of the most significant aspects of isolation is how it slows you down. In the busyness of life, it's easy to rush forward without taking the time to grow, reflect, and prepare. Isolation forces you to pause, creating a space where God can do a deep work in your heart and mind. It's in this quiet time that He begins to mold you into the person you need to become to handle what's coming next. The blessings God has in store are often larger than we can imagine, and without proper preparation, we may find ourselves overwhelmed by the very things we prayed for. Consider the story of David. Before he became king, David spent years in isolation tending sheep in the fields. That time may have seemed insignificant or even lonely, but it was anything but wasted. In those quiet, hidden moments, David developed the skills, character, and faith he would need as a leader. He learned how to care for others, defend his flock, and trust God in the face of danger. By the time he stepped into his role as king, he wasn't just ready, he was equipped to fulfill his purpose. Isolation is often the season where God builds your foundation. He strengthens your faith, refines your character, and aligns your priorities with his will. This preparation ensures that when the blessing arrives, it won't become a burden. Imagine receiving a responsibility or opportunity that you're not yet prepared for. The weight of it could crush you instead of elevating you. God, in his wisdom and love, doesn't want that for you. That's why he uses isolation as a time to grow your capacity to handle more. Another critical aspect of isolation is the clarity it brings. Away from the noise of the crowd, you can hear God's voice more clearly and understand his direction for your life. This clarity helps you to see the blessing for what it truly is, a gift to be stewarded, not a reward to be hoarded. God uses this time to align your heart with his, ensuring that your motives and actions will reflect his purpose when the blessing arrives. The waiting in isolation can be difficult, but it's also an act of trust. It's a declaration that you believe in God's timing and his ability to prepare you for what's ahead. And when the season shifts, when the blessing comes, you'll see that every moment of waiting was worth it. You'll step into the new season with confidence, strength, and readiness, knowing that God's preparation was perfect and his timing was always right. Isolation is not abandonment, it's preparation. It's a sacred time where God works behind the scenes to strengthen your faith, refine your character, sharpen your vision, and prepare you for the weight of the blessings he has in store. While the season may feel lonely or challenging, it's in these moments that God is closest, shaping you into the person he's called you to be. Every challenge you face, every lesson you learn, and every quiet moment spent seeking him is not wasted. It's part of his greater plan, perfectly timed and meticulously crafted for your good and his glory. Trust that he sees the end from the beginning and knows exactly what you need to walk into your purpose with confidence, resilience, and humility. So, embrace the process. Lean into the stillness. Listen for his voice and allow him to prepare you for what's ahead. Because when the season of isolation ends, you'll step into your blessings not only ready to receive them, but also equipped to handle them and use them for his glory. Thank you for taking this journey with me today. May you find peace, strength, and purpose in your season of preparation. God bless you.